Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Otherppl podcast, a weekly program featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi here in Los Angeles. Thank you for listening. Hope everything's going okay out there wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. So my guest today is Regina Porter, author of a new novel called The Rich People Have Gone Away.
All of it emerges through a character. I do not ever write toward a theme. I write toward getting to know the character. The more you know the character, the more specific the world of the character, the more organically the themes will come out, and by and large, the more universal I think those themes will be.
Okay, that was Regina Porter. Her new novel is called The Rich People Have Gone Away. It is available now from Hogarth. The Rich People Have Gone Away is set in 2020, in the heart of the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic. This is a riveting polyphonic novel about the lives of ordinary New Yorkers living in an extraordinary time. It is also a crime story, a missing person story, and it brings into focus, this novel does, the pressures that were brought to bear by the pandemic, pressures that, to some extent, remain with us. It exposed some fault lines, let's put it that way, both in personal relationships and also at a more macro level. This is a page-turner and a deeply intelligent novel that does a great job of illuminating our recent collective past. I had a great time meeting Regina Porter and talking with her about The Rich People Have Gone Away. That conversation is coming up. Don't forget to sign up for my weekly email newsletter. You can do that at Substack. And if you are a regular listener, if you love this program and appreciate the work that I do, please join the Otherppl Patreon community at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this program going into the future. Today's episode is brought to you by The Feminist Press, publisher of a new story collection called Reservoir Bitches by Dalia de la Cerda, one of Mexico's most thrilling new writers. Reservoir Bitches is the official September pick of my book club, the Otherppl Book Club. If you want to join my book club, you can do that at otherppl.com. You can also get yourself a copy of Reservoir Bitches for 20% off over at feministpress.org. Use the code RES20 when you buy your book and get 20% off. Again, that's feministpress.org. Use the code RES20, get 20% off of Reservoir Bitches, the acclaimed new story collection by Dalia de la Cerda, available from the Feminist Press. So my guest, once again, is Regina Porter. Her new novel is called The Rich People Have Gone Away. It is available now from Hogarth. Regina Porter is an award-winning playwright and the author of a debut novel called The Travelers, which was a finalist for the Hemingway Award, and it was also longlisted for the Orwell Prize for political fiction. Regina is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and her work has been published in a variety of publications, including the Harvard Review, Tin House, and the Oxford American. So great to welcome Regina Porter onto this show and to have the chance to share our conversation with all of you right now. So let's get to it. Here I am with Regina Porter, and her new novel, one more time, is called The Rich People Have Gone Away.
I was here in Brooklyn. I remember March 15th walking my dog and getting a call from a good friend in Switzerland, John Wag. And he said, "Do you have a mask on?" I think March 15th was a Sunday. And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I want you to go and get a mask. I want you to go and get a box of masks, and I want you to wear them because," he's a scientist, "a lot of people are going to die. And the sooner you're president, accepts or understands that we're dealing with a pandemic, the better. I think he gave a rough estimate for how many people he thought would die, and he was pretty accurate. And I remember going to the local pharmacy and buying masks and sort of wearing them from that point on. And I was here in Brooklyn, and I think I did go upstate. One of my closest friends is Deshaun Winslow, and he was living actually in Socrates. So I want to say that, was it 2021, or it might have even been in the summer of 2020, I went up to Socrates to just get out of the city. But yeah, I was here.
Well, I think the choice to set a pandemic novel in a place like New York, which not only has this population density and this kind of human closeness that makes it's like a more threatening atmosphere when it comes to communicable disease, right? Because you're in such close contact with people and in such close quarters. So there's that aspect of it. And of course, it was a hotspot for the virus, especially in those early days. New York City was the place, banging on the pots, the wailing of sirens constantly, lots of people dying. It was a very intense place to be experiencing the pandemic.
Very much so. And similarly, I feel a strong connection with Italy, because I think Italy was hit also especially hard. I remember people dying at high rates there too. That was one of the countries that was hit hard. But yes, it was, the city seemed to change overnight. I liken it to, I'm a huge fan of the film, what is it, 28 Days Later, like a horror film. It's one, and I just remember walking and thinking, oh my God, it's like 28 days later, except I haven't come out of a coma. I'm just walking around, and where is everyone? There were so few people out walking around in Park Slope, and yes, especially April. Mm-hmm.
What I couldn't help but think about as I was reading your book, I was reading your book on 9/11. Mm-hmm. So that happened. And then I'm reading about the pandemic. Yeah. And then I'm thinking about like financial collapses, like the big collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008 and the Great Recession, the associated financial collapse when it comes to the pandemic, which was the biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression. We as a country and as a world have been through so many traumas in the 21st century. And I guess I was just thinking of all of them in relationship to one another. And I was trying to grapple with how these things might be affecting us now. Like, what is the total impact? It's impossible to measure, but that's where my head went. And some of it is circumstantial, just the timing of when I was reading and what was happening in the world. But I don't know, it just gave me pause. Like, we have been through quite a lot in this century. Is that a thought that occurred to you as you were working on this book?
I try not to think on a grand scale, if that seems crazy to say, because then I'm afraid I'm going to start preaching, or it's going to become too thematic. And for me, the themes, they're always there, but they come later in a way that I can maybe understand them, articulate them. I can't always articulate them while I'm writing. I did know that people were dying. I did know that a lot of people were able to get away, and a lot of people weren't. And if you're asking me about how we process trauma, because we were talking about, it's funny, I'm being asked these philosophical questions, and I'm not a philosopher, I'm just a writer. But a recurring question that I'm asked is, how have we processed the trauma? And I would say it's an ongoing process. I do think we're seeing manifestations of trauma, though. I don't think that the wars, that we're seeing are unrelated. I think that, and this is just a personal philosophical belief, when millions of people just die and there's no collective mourning process, the value of life diminishes somehow, and we haven't reconciled that. And so when I look up and I see wars, I'm like, okay, because, we didn't really, I don't know that we have a language. We're still struggling for that language, right? I think I wrote the book maybe using the characters to try to understand what is a pandemic? Why now? Why did it happen? Will it happen again? Or will we be prepared? What did we learn from it? So I hope I answered your question, but I think that maybe one of the ways we process it is by being a little more violent in terms of war. But also you have people who are more humane, right? And certainly the pandemic has challenged us all to be a little less complacent, I think. Yeah.
You liked it. I mean, I feel like we're going to learn, right? We learn from whatever we go through one way or another. It would be nice to think that we could learn the right things, like the right lessons.
Well, maybe I think you could argue that, say, with personal relationships and time and how we manage or value time, some people realize they were caught in a work grind, and it's very interesting. So maybe a positive from COVID is there's some people who will say, I'll take less money if I have to spend less time commuting and more time with my family. So I think that's a positive change, but I think that's also tied into how we value life and time and assessing that, right? Sometimes if we shut down from those feelings, then human life is less important. If we grapple or deal with those feelings, which I try to have Theo do, not always successfully because he's Theo, then you value life a little more. You might value time with a loved one a little more and prioritize it over work or balance it with work. Do you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I feel like speaking of like a range of outcomes, lots of people had that experience during the pandemic where they kind of reassessed what's most important, and they got a break from the normal work grind that would not have happened in the absence of the pandemic. And so they made these shifts. It gave them a moment to kind of breathe and realize just how much they were missing out on by having to constantly be on that hamster wheel. And then the opposite end of the spectrum, I think, had many people suddenly confined to their domestic life, and it brought out all sorts of challenges, or it surfaced all sorts of tensions in relationships. Lots of people did not have such a happy experience of the pandemic having to be at home, right?
There were a lot of divorces after the pandemic.
So when did it occur to you that you wanted to write about this and make fiction about this?
In April 2020, but I fought it. I was working on something else, and you mentioned like there are a lot of COVID novels coming out. I absolutely did not want to write a COVID novel, but as I said, I went for that walk where there were a lot of homeless people and folks like me running errands over in Park Slope, and everyone who had some place to go or home seemed like they were rushing to get back. And I came home and it just kept bothering me to the point that I could not focus on what I was writing. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to write about this, I approach everything through character, and I follow character. I need a character and I don't have a character, so I just forgot about it. And then the character of Theo came to me in a doorway, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Why is he in the doorway? It usually just starts with a series of questions, and so now I have an end, because this is a lifestyle issue that's going to be challenged by the pandemic.
It's interesting. I ask writers about the kind of creative origin stories of their books all the time. It's so fascinating to me how an entire elaborate, and in this case, polyphonic novel, there's so many different characters whose lives you are delving into in this book. And it begins from this tiny little seed. It's incredible to me. And I guess like a question is like, how do you know when to trust such a small like visual or moment or flash? Like, are there ones that pan out and ones that don't? Have you gotten an intuitive sense over the years of doing this work of when you've really got something? Like when a character or one of these little flashes of insight is worth pursuing?
Yes, if it turns out that I'm stalking the character, I sometimes hit a wall. But if the character's stalking me, in a sense, then I have somewhere to go, because then it's a little. It's like, well, okay, I have to. You behave this way, so now what's the consequence? And then who? Okay, so you like to have sex in doorways. So, all right, you're married. Who's your partner? And the world just continues opening up for me. But I found that if I try to force it, like if I say, well, I'm going to write a character and this character is going to do this, and that, it doesn't work for me. Yeah. And the more I know about a character, and I found this out the hard way years ago, and I still tried to apply it, but then I stopped because it's just not my process. Some writers can write journals and journals of notes and know everything about the character. It kills the mystery for me. I like discovering where the narrative's going with the character.
In the process.
In the process, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned doorways, and that's definitely something that you highlight in this novel. Like in these there's a quote, I think, in the beginning section about doorways and the history of doorways and what they were made out of. It's the sort of thing, I love this in fiction or in any book that I read, where an everyday item or experience that we sort of take for granted
Mm-hmm.
is redefined and illuminated for me in ways that are kind of surprising. I don't think about doors. And yet in the pandemic era, we were all kind of behind our closed doors, and that was sort of our barrier of protection. And I'm thinking in particular of, these essential workers delivering packages to people's houses of paper towel and toilet paper and toothpaste and all this stuff. And, particularly in that March of 2020 era, when we didn't really understand quite how the virus behaved, we were wiping down groceries at our house. I don't know if you were, but
yes. And that changed. I think people, booksellers, some of them were wrapping books, and which I tried to use in the novel. But I still remember, and because I have a sense of humor, you have to have a sense of humor in this life, or you won't get through it. I was able to laugh a little then. Now I can just laugh out loud now because I know we survived COVID. But I remember the UPS drivers and the Amazon drivers ringing the doorbell and then throwing the packages and just running down the street. And I still sometimes I'll laugh out loud because it's kind of hilarious and it's insane, but we thought it was carried through packages and surfaces, right? So, but think about it, like now it's something, we have enough distance, I can look back and I could laugh comfortably about it. Or at that time, I'm a writer, I have a little bit of a dark sense of humor. I think this is also insane. Like sometimes it's also insane.
I feel like there are different responses to an experience like that. Some people maybe emerge with like you say, a sense of dark humor. A lot of people are angry about it. And that response is often, I feel like disproportionate to what was actually happening.
But people have a deep, privilege is maybe not the right word. We live in a country where people have a deep sense of their rights and their right to freedom, and that felt for many people like an infringement, on their rights and liberty. So, and a violation of it, even though it was necessary to save lives and did in fact, the lockdown did in fact save lives. So, and we did live through a pandemic. Some people still argue that there wasn't a pandemic or COVID. I don't know. It's really kind of complicated. It seems very straightforward and simple to me, but some people have a communal sense of freedom and some people have a very individualized sense of freedom.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yes.
And I want to, delve deeper into your book in the ways in which it explores the consequences, like we were just kind of discussing, the human consequences of a pandemic and the variety of ways in which people respond. They have their individual responses to it, but also the ways in which the pandemic brought to the fore issues of race, class, gender. Like there's all sorts of different manifestations of this thing. It wasn't just about a virus and people getting sick and dying. It was also all of these other, societal issues that I think in that kind of pressurized environment really emerged in sharp focus. Am I barking up the right tree?
Maybe I did. I didn't know. I just had a character who, like most people, and sometimes like myself even, doesn't really like necessarily to deal with conflict or unpleasant realities. And then the lockdown happens, and Theo Harper, who is of, I guess, ambiguous ancestry, notices that people are dying, and a lot of the people happen to be people of color, and there are not enough ventilators, and he begins to wonder why, and it makes him uncomfortable. And he can't go and have sex in doorways, which, sex is wonderful, but sometimes sex is also a distraction, and he has to sit with that along with his wife and sort of think about his privilege. And so it literally, for me, just builds from that. Well, who are the family members and who are the friends? And so who's going to enter their lives, and what are the friends and family members' lives and political views? Like, how are they going to handle the pandemic? And so I don't know. I hope I'm answering it. I just don't really think in terms of big themes, because oftentimes you're talking about race, you're talking about class, and then you're talking about class, you're talking about race, and these things are always happening. They just happened in the pandemic in a way that we could not pretend, because it was right in front of us, and everybody's sitting at home, and everyone has more or less. You can't go out, and it might also, going back to your question of why some people are so angry about it, those things were in their face that they might not want to deal with or might not want to believe, and they were there, and that may be where some of that anger rests that you're talking about. Some of the inequities that perhaps it becomes harder to say no, it's all in your head when everyone's witnessing it, right? And I certainly think it did for Theo, and by extension, Darla and some of the other characters.
And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, like you've said this a couple times, but I think it's worth underlining for people who are listening who might be writers, is that even though there are big themes and maybe philosophical questions embedded in the text, that is not a concern of yours, or at least a primary concern as you sit down to write. All of that stuff emerges through character.
All of it emerges through a character. I do not ever write toward a theme. I write toward getting to know the character. The more you know the character, the more specific the world of the character, the more organically the themes will come out, and by and large, the more universal I think those themes will be. Sometimes if you're writing toward a theme, you risk making, and not some people can do that. Everyone has their process. My fear is always, if I write toward a theme, I run the risk of making the character into a stereotype or a sociological study, which as a writer and a writer of color, I kind of resist, because people are always ready to rush and sort of project onto me, ask me about the societal woes, and I'm just trying to create a very human, flawed character. And if I create the character well enough, then you're going to think about those things anyway, because that's life, right?
And I'm wondering, like as a creative process matter, how like whole cloth they emerge for you. I know you said Theo originated with this idea of doorways and just sort of expanded from there. how much trial and error is there in building a character for you? You know what I'm saying? These creative choices you make about like where he's from, what his background is, what his sexuality is, all of these different things that we have to decide about as writers when we are building a character on the page. Like, is it like, does it happen quickly, or are you struggling there and like maybe making one choice, but then retracting it later? And I'm just wondering what it looks like for you.
Well, Theo is from Iowa, but I also lived in Iowa, and I remember once being, I think it was a class, Paul Harding was teaching it. It was Marilyn Monroe's, Marilyn Monroe was, Marilyn Robinson's a seminar, and the Bible seminar, the Old Testament. And we had to all go down in the basement because there was a thunderstorm. I was always getting these storms, and it was kind of dramatic. And that sort of stayed with me. And so I think when we write, and I tell students this, you're always charting things, aspects of your life, even if you don't know it. So now when I look back, it's organic that Theo would be from Iowa, because that made an impression. I was like, oh, they say the storms are bad here. Because I remember the next morning for breakfast, I stayed at an international B&B. Iowa City wasn't badly hit, but I think other parts of Iowa were hit pretty harshly by the storm. And so I left with I left Iowa with an understanding of the damage a storm could do, not really knowing that I would use it, but it if you think about Theo's, and I don't like to think about this kind of stuff when I'm writing, so I can talk about it a little now because I'm kind of removed. But if you think about Theo's internal process, and it's kind of stormy, right? He's kind of it's organic that he'd come from a place where the weather is kind of unpredictable and can be a little harsh. But if I were thinking that when I started writing it in a clear and linear way, his character might not be as interesting.
Well, I want to talk to you about your background and how you got here. I think I read that you were born in Savannah, Georgia. Is that right?
Savannah, Georgia, yeah.
Beautiful town.
Yes, it is beautiful. Yeah.
I spent time there years ago when I was just out of college. I spent like a month in Savannah. It's my only time there, but it's like, feels like a unique place. It's like got like the architecture and the Spanish moss. Am I getting that right? Those old
Spanish
trees
moss,
and
yes. Mm-hmm.
it's just gorgeous and distinct.
Everywhere, yeah. Very Gothic.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet spent most of your life in New York.
Yes, I came here to go to college as an undergrad, and I haven't left really, aside for grad school. Yeah.
Where did you go to undergrad?
Tisch.
Were you? I read too, and this like sort of stood out to me, so I underlined it. But you said in something that I was reading, I spent a great deal of time around older people as a child.
Yes.
Like with grandparents and stuff. I'm just wondering
I was very close with my grandmother, and I kind of referenced that in the book, a little nod to her. And just, the world has changed because we're all over the place geographically. It used to be, and some families still do this, but not as much. It used to be where during the summers, there would be multiple family reunions or gatherings, and the young kids would go off and play, and the older adults would sit and talk. And I was the kid who was kind of, I play with the younger kids and the kids my age, but oh my gosh, what are they saying? The older, adults. And I think just listening to them, they didn't all speak in the same way, with the same rhythm. So I think I just internalized just different patterns of speech and just how to listen to how people talk, and how they tell stories.
Do you have storytellers in your family? Is there a writerly or like a narrative tradition that you feel like you're drawing from
I feel like
familiarly?
one I learned, say, at an event. My mother has a friend she's known since she was a child, and he said once, "Oh, you have an ear for poetry, and you get that from your mom. Your mother used to write when we were in school. She would just write. She could write a poem or whatever, just in like the blink of an eye. She was so good, and that's how I found that out about her. So." And my father was a longshoreman, and that's hard work. So when he would come home, he would watch films, and so he loved it's not politically correct maybe, but he loved westerns. He loved old movies, and so I learned a lot. And I think maybe that's where I get my visual sense. I learned a lot about movies and film for my father, even though he was not formally educated. I said when I went to Tisch, it was very interesting. I had an appreciation for film that I kind of owe to my dad, just because he also knew so much about the movie stars and everything in the background, like what was going on, like Gary Cooper having, I say this, cancer when I think he was shooting High Noon, or how Clark Gable never got over, who was his, I'm forgetting his wife's name, who died. She died, and so he knew all of these details. So that when you're watching, or Spencer Tracy or Marlon Brando, I know all of this stuff. So there's this, in a way, you're learning subtext, but you're learning subtext and you don't even know you're learning subtext. You're learning that somebody's performing and they're being an actor, but there's this whole other life going on, and that's a wonderful gift. But as a child, and thank God, I wasn't thinking, oh, my dad's giving me a wonderful gift. I was just a kid watching movies with my dad, who was from a certain generation where he's not going to talk about emotions or stuff like that, but he will talk about film. He's really tired, and he will say, "Oh, or the Nicholas brothers, or Mr. Bojangles." Or he just knew so much. But I also think it's why I can write complex characters too, because I learned you can have a very sophisticated understand. Someone from a modest background could have an understanding, or be able to dissect film or art without a formal education, in a way that's just really profound and unpretentious. And I think that helps me with writing.
That's kind of touching.
Well, I'm not going to respond to that.
No, I am. Just to think of your father loving movies so much and sharing that with you, and maybe using the emotional language of cinema as a way to express himself, perhaps subtly. Like that makes a certain human sense to me that I find like heartwarming and maybe familiar and recognizable. That's the kind of thing that especially people of maybe an older generation, like you say, might have done. A question that arises for me is whether or not you think, did your father have maybe some kind of latent performative talent or something? Do you think he wanted to be in the movies, or do you think it was more of like a scholarly appreciation for it?
I just think he loved movies, and I just think your parents have whole lives that you don't necessarily know about, or necessarily unwrap. And so he had this life, I don't know. He loved, he loved, what's his name? Tap dancer, angel with a dirty face, and, oh, come on, you have to know.
Gregory Hines? I'm trying to think of.
Oh no, Gregory Hines was another great tap dancer. I mean,
Yeah.
Uh, I'm forgetting his name. Shame on us! Shame on us! Shame on us! But he started out in vaudeville. So this idea, though, and I remember showing the students I was teaching this class the history of vaudeville, and then coming up Gosh, and now it's going to drive me crazy when we think
Wait, is
about
it
it.
Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire? I'm just
Not
trying to think
Gene
of who.
Kelly or Freddie. You don't think you see Angel with a Dirty Face? Angel with a Dirty Face. Come on,
I can't.
James
I'm not.
Cagney. James Cagney.
There we
James
go.
Cagney was a great dancer, a great tap dancer and performer. My father would always say, "Oh, he could really dance. He could do anything. He could do, and he worked really hard." So there's in that too, like the work ethic of someone, and then who worked really hard. And then I remember this past spring, I was teaching a course, and I went to look up like vaudeville. Like the history of television, actually, like vaudeville performers, and then there's James Cagney dancing, and they talk about his big break and the discipline that he applied to from that background to film, and so many of those performers did, and also the like my father talked about like the racism too, and so there you have it too, like some of the African American vaudeville performers who just didn't get the opportunities. But I think we're veering off. But this just this point of like, I think I learned, and I wasn't even aware that I was learning it, some great pointers maybe or nuances of like subtext, like what's going on when someone's performing and then what's going on behind the scenes. And that's what often happens, right, in fiction, right? The characters or in great television or film, characters are having a conversation, but they might not really be having the conversation they need to have. There are other things going on.
Speaking of performance, I read somewhere that you can sing.
Yes.
You have a gift. You have a musical gift in addition to being a gifted writer, and I'm curious to know, as somebody who is tone deaf, about that. Like that, this is something you just have, but you gravitated more towards writing and literature rather than pursuing some sort of musical path.
Yes, I don't. I wouldn't want to be on stage singing in front of people. It always gave me just huge butterflies, and I didn't like it. And I like the solitude of writing, and then reader going off and having their experience with the book and the characters and their interpretation, and then
Is there any aspect of your musical gift that you feel like informs your approach to writing? Like, because like there are writers, I think, who are more and less lyrical than others on the page. I've had conversations with writers who have, like, a surprising number of writers are either in bands or can sing. I just talked to Elizabeth Strout, and she's like a wonderful piano player. I'm so jealous of these multi-talented human beings. But do you feel like maybe your musical ability informs your writing in a distinct way?
well, I love music, so sometimes when I'm writing, I will listen to music. Sometimes I'll stop and is almost like, okay, this might be a bridge here, or so I do think it depends. Not some characters more than others, uh, yeah, it's not a straight line in a way, but I listen to music when I write, and sometimes when I'm stuck, I'll dance around the house, and and that'll jolt something in my brain, and then I can go back and refocus. Yeah, yeah.
Is there a kind of music that you gravitate to, like as background music for writing?
No, it's all over the place. It has more to do. Sometimes a song will help me understand a character, And I think again that's maybe that's poetry, right? Because songs are can be lyrics can be a little like poetry. So yeah, yeah.
When in your young life, as you look back, did you start to think that you would want to write books or become like an artist yourself? I know you did some playwriting and maybe studied that at Tisch, but like, can you just talk about like when you knew? Is this something you were aware of from a very early age, or was it something that you really zeroed in on as you got
Well,
older and got into school?
I always like writing, but even now it can feel a little ridiculous to say I'm a writer. It can feel a little pretentious. I'm more comfortable saying it now, but I always liked writing. If I think about it, it's the thing that makes me happiness. Like, I think if I don't write, as miserable as one can be when one is writing and things aren't going well, because you can be pretty miserable. If I think, how do I say it? How do I say it? There's a point when you're writing where when it's not going well, it's the most uncomfortable seat in the world. But then when it is going well, time just zips by and you can look up and go, oh my God, where did the time go? I completely lost myself, in these characters. I imagine it must be the same for actors who sort of lose themselves in a role, right?
So that's it. And when you got to Tisch, was playwriting your initial focus, like as a student?
Playwriting was my focus, but it's funny because I would say I think I want to write plays like Toni Morrison writes novels, and what I meant was I want to write a novel, but I'm terrified to write a novel. And it took me a decade or more to finally gather the courage to sit down and write a novel. Yeah, yeah.
Did you write plays in the interim
Yes, wrote plays. Yeah, wrote plays.
and put them up on stage and stuff?
Some were up on stage, some were in drawers. Yeah, yeah.
I always ask these kind of questions about cross-pollination because they fascinate me. As I said, I've talked to lots of writers who are also musicians. I've talked to many writers who have also written for TV and film.
hmm
Occasionally, I'll talk to like a visual artist or an architect who writes or something like that. But I don't know how many conversations I've had about playwriting specifically and what it might bring to the writing of fiction later on. Like if you spent kind of formative years studying playwriting and that was your beginning and you know, kind of took a lot of swings at that. You wrote a lot of plays, as you said. When you now reflect on the work that you do as a writer of fiction, are there things that you can point to that you might have learned from your playwriting that help you or make your work distinct in some way?
Well, I think plays, certainly studying playwriting and classic drama, there were often choruses. And so a chorus can also function kind of like a narrator or
Oh, you're saying like chorus,
like
like a chorus.
like the chorus, like the Greek chorus in Aeschylus or something like that, or Oedipus. That the or I'll give you an example because I think Fitzgerald wrote plays. In The Great Gatsby, sometimes it can feel like there's a chorus when you read it, and so that's what's so great. And Toni Morrison studied playwriting, I believe. So like there's some elements in terms of form maybe that are in place. And when people say, and I just thought about this recently, it's so funny after all of these years, well, you write multiple characters, like how do you do it? And that's very challenging. And it occurred to me, but wait, when you're a playwright, multiple characters come on stage and people follow them, right? People have to follow them. So it may make sense that I can flow from one character to the next because you have to set things up with a play where the audience is able to follow the individual characters. So that might be just one example. I don't know if that's,
Well, no, that's interesting to hear because you're working with this kind of, it's like this broad tapestry of characters, which I think forgive me, I have not read your debut, but I know that I think it also works with
yeah.
a similarly large cast.
Yes.
So this is kind of your MO so far. And I think
they
that
come organically from the play. That may be a connection. And I just thought about that recently because someone asked me that. And I thought, well, why, but yeah, if I have characters, unless there's a monologue, they usually multiple characters on a stage and you follow them. So maybe this is just organic to me. It's just part of coming from a playwriting background. I don't know. Yeah.
so you are at Tisch and You're kind of like wanting to write novels, but you're not quite there yet. But then eventually you go off to the Iowa Writers Workshop. I think you alluded to this earlier.
Yeah.
You must have been writing some fiction. You had to write some fiction to get into the Iowa Writers Workshop. So you were dabbling at some point, right?
Yes, I almost gave up writing. I almost got discouraged, and I had lunch with a playwright friend, and I'll always owe her, Lynn Nottage. And she said, well, maybe take a workshop or something. You just have to write, just write anything. And it doesn't even matter how good the teacher is. It just matters that you just go and you just start writing again. And I did. And she goes, oh, I think even I saw something. There's this place like right around the corner. And just poke your head in and go. And I did. And I ended up writing 2 chapters, I think, of the 3 chapters I would submit to get into Iowa. Yeah.
And were those chapters connected to your debut?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
Okay. So how was I've talked to many writers who have been to Iowa, and I always like to ask, what was your experience like? I've heard a variety of things over the years. Like, what did it help you? Were you, were the workshops kind? I'm just curious.
It absolutely helped me. But remember, I also went as an older writer, so I understood the importance and the gift of time. You have 2 years, and I thought I lived in New York, I have family in New York. I thought if I'm going to go away for 2 years, there is no way in hell that I'm not going to come back with a draft of a book. And I went in, I want to say, like I said, what I think 3 chapters, and I came home with a book. And so it was just a lot of work. And I was very fortunate my first semester to have a Scottish writer, Margot Levesey, as my first workshop teacher.
I've spoken with her.
Well, she's wonderful. And she's a wonderful human being, and she's a wonderful teacher, and she's very, very generous, and she reads more than anyone. My friend Monica West reads a lot. She reads a ton, and she reads poetry. She's widely read, so she's really open. And so it turned out, I wasn't expecting to study with her, but it turned out to be a gift because she was very open. I was not writing necessarily traditionally, but she was very open to that and very encouraging. And when I told her, I said, help me out here, because you're so good with writing physical description. I just don't like it. The dialogue I can do, but I just, I'm worried about it being too stiff. And Margaret said, it's very interesting. When I first came to America, I worked at ART, and there was this playwright, Beth Henley. And I think she said she was one of the people reading Beth Henley's stage directions actually helped her learn how to write prose. And from the moment she said that, it was just like, we put all of these boundaries, something just collapsed in a way that we put all of these boundaries. Is it a short story? Is it a novel? Is it a play? And I just think these things all blend, and it just was one of the most freeing things she could have said to me, because from then on, I don't worry about it anymore. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love hearing stories like that.
She's a great teacher. Great. Just a lovely person. Yeah.
Her novel, I think it's called The Road from Belhaven.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the better books in recent memory that I've read. I love that book.
Yeah. She's fabulous. Yeah. I was supposed to get up there this weekend, up to Boston to see her, but I'm not going to be able to make it because I got a lot going on here. But yeah, one of my absolute favorite teachers. Yeah. Okay,
so you finish the program at Iowa, you have manuscript in hand, and you get a great book deal. Like debut novel, like you had like an experience that I think most writers who dream of publishing a book and getting it done would dream about. It was a a positive situation? Can we characterize it that way?
Positive, but also overwhelming because it just, I've been working so intensely on the book, but yeah.
But it you got what are they? I forget what the language is in like publishing parlance, like a good deal. It sold foreign rights, just like kind of the dream for a writer of literary fiction to have the work recognized and to have there be enthusiasm around it. So like a wonderful experience in many respects, I would imagine. And I'm curious to know about following it up because, it's rare to have that happen for a debut. And when it does, it's great. But then there's got to be another book. And maybe it was fine. Maybe you just put the blinders on and just stayed focused and wrote the second book. Or was there any difference for you psychologically and emotionally knowing that you had this success out of the gates and now you have to write a sophomore novel?
Uh, because I don't follow things like book sales, and I was advised it's a good habit in general not to invest or too much in reviews or not to read them. Sometimes that's hard to do. I tend to just really, really, really try to focus on the work because then you can start second guessing yourself. The challenging thing for writing a second novel for me personally was writing a novel can be a little like losing your virginity. Once you know what you know, then you know what you know, what you know, and then you have to. But the second novel kind of forget what you know or use what you know in a different way, but it's like, and so um so a lot of people have, or maybe it's even rebounding after, so a lot of people have an ambivalent relationship about that second novel. And I remember friends say, well, I know you're ambivalent, and most of us are ambivalent about second novels, but Regina, you know, maybe it's time you stop calling it a second novel. And that helped. Like when I stopped calling it because I knew the title, but I would refer to it as like, oh, the second novel, because for some reason you get, and I think it's like, it's not, your first novel you love in a different way. Do you know what I'm saying? You love your first novel. It's like falling in love. When I say it's like falling in love for the first time, even if you don't like everything about it, you say, I did it, I finished it, I done. And the second one, it's like, oh.
I got to do this again.
I gotta, oh, yeah.
But now here you are, and you've written a wonderful second novel. And I always ask my guests if they have anything in the works. A lot of writers sort of just always have a project kind of humming in the background. It's okay if you do not, but I'm wondering if you've got another project going.
In the works? No, I mean, I can feel my brain working on something. I know I'm looking at the world in a certain way, and I hear certain things. Like I have an idea, but nothing that I could possibly sit down and just really physically work on right now while I'm promoting the book. Yeah. So.
Any hints as to what is catching your eye? Do you have any, like, is there any like vague sense of direction that you would have for another book? Is there something that you want to try to write?
Um, last summer, my friend from Switzerland who used to live in the States, and I'd promised for like 20 years I would visit, and I didn't, had a big birthday, and I thought, with COVID, after COVID, we really should try to like connect and see people. So I went to Switzerland for the birthday party and traveled around some. And one day, Switzerland was really hot. I went to, I'm forgetting the name of the castle where Lord Byron wrote. And while I was there, I was thinking, well, Lord Byron, Shelley, and Mary Shelley, it's where she wrote Frankenstein. And I've always said I would love one day to write, like, I think it's a horror story on the level of like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which again deals with class and everything. But that's it's just something I would love to do. But I just like that feeling, something that I said years ago I would like to do. If I'm ever able to do it, I don't know. But I remember just standing and there's this pillar and Lord Byron's is a dungeon. His name is engraved on it, and I'm like, and oh my God, they were all here, and they stayed. I think they stayed in Geneva, and but I don't know what that would look, because it would be from my experience of whatever, and I don't know. But yeah, but that's usually how sometimes things come. Like now that's a feeling. That's like a feeling that comes over. Sometimes it's a visual image. Sometimes it's a piece of dialogue. Yeah, that's just yeah.
A monster novel.
I didn't say that. I said
you don't know. Okay. I'm not trying to pin you down here to one thing, but the reason I like to ask it is because it'll be interesting. Like 2 or 3, 4 years from now, like that book is written and comes out, like I can maybe compare notes and see what was what. Like how fully formed was the idea, and where did it end up? But it's a pleasure to talk with you and to just have a chance to pick your brain. Congratulations on your new novel, and I wish you all the best with this next project, whatever it turns out to be.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right, folks, there we go. That is today's conversation with Regina Porter. Her new novel is called The Rich People Have Gone Away, out there now from Hogarth. You can find Regina on the internet. She's on Twitter and Instagram. Follow her there. Again, the book is called The Rich People Have Gone Away. Get your copy right now. Go get it. It's out there waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Bluesky. Sign up for my newsletter at Substack. Join the Otherppl Patreon community at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, do me a quick favor. Please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm. It helps it find new listeners. To join my book club, or to get an Otherppl t-shirt, or to do both at the same time, you can just head on over to the show's official website, otherppl.com. If you would like to read my latest book, it is a novel called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, available in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook. So if you want to read my book, if that sounds good, or if you want to have me read it to you, go for it. It's a book, it's a novel. It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. All right, so coming up on Thursday, there will be a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture. I will be joined, as usual, by my co-host, Mira Gonzalez. We will be talking about pop culture. Mira will be teaching me things that I don't know about. You know how it goes on Brad and Mira for the Culture. That is coming up on Thursday. Stay tuned.